Welcome to First Look, Washington Post Live's one-stop shop for news and analysis. I'm Jonathan Capehart, associate editor for the Washington Post. From meeting with Speaker McCarthy about the debt ceiling to a sit-down with the Congressional Black Caucus in the wake of the death of Tyre Nichols to preparation for Tuesday's State of the Union, it's been a big week at the White House, and who better to talk with about all of this than Tolu Olorunnipa, White House bureau chief for the Washington Post. Tolu, welcome back to First Look.
Hey, Jonathan. Good morning. It's great to be with you.
All right, we're going to talk about, or try to talk about all those things that I mentioned, but real quickly, huge news on the economic front. 517,000 jobs created in January. The unemployment rate, the lowest in decades, at 3.4%. You think they're popping champagne at the White House at this hour?
They most certainly are. This is great news for President Biden, for his administration. They have been trying to calm the fears of a recession for quite a long time. They've been dealing with the Federal Reserve, which has been raising rates, hoping that that would not calm the job market or cool down the job market too much, where we might see a number of job losses. And so they have to take this number and just have to be happy with it, in part because it shows that the markets are likely to continue to be strong because people see a strong job market, and that flows out to the rest of the economy. So I do expect we'll hear from the president, we'll hear from his top officials later today about how proud they are of the job they're doing. They're going to take credit for every job that was added in January and say that that starts off the year on a very positive note, and they likely believe that we'll continue along that line for the rest of the year, despite the fact that there were a number of people saying that we would be in a recession early in 2023. They're going to take this number and say this is the best evidence that that's not going to happen.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing that victory lap or laps just chew up all the time. I'm sure they will do that. All right, let's talk about this meeting that the president had, that he hosted at the White House in the Oval Office with the leadership of the Congressional Black Caucus. This obviously comes after the president sent a delegation to the Tyre Nichols funeral. Vice President Harris led that delegation. She spoke at the funeral. Here's what CBC Chair Congressman Stephen Horsford of Nevada said before the start of the meeting yesterday.
The death of Tyre Nichols is yet another example of why we do need action. But you've already led on the action that we've been able to take through executive order. We need your help to make sure we can get the legislative actions that are necessary to save lives and to make public safety the priority that it needs to be for all communities. So I want to thank you for that.
Okay, so a very compelling shot there. I already talked about, why they were there meeting with the president, but overall, what was the goal of that gathering?
The goal was to keep at it and not give up when it comes to legislation on police reform, despite the fact that the numbers are stacked heavily against the Democrats. The Democrats are pretty united on the idea that there needs to be police reform. They passed the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act last year out of the House. But now the House is run by Republicans, and you haven't really seen any movement among Republicans around the idea of reforming how policing is done in America. There were too many differences between the two parties to pass police reform last year and in 2021 as well. And so it does appear that it's going to be also too difficult to get things moving when you look at what Republicans have been saying things like there's no law that could have stopped what happened to Tyre Nichols. We need to block Democrats from trying to defund the police, turning this into a political issue as we look into the potential of another reelection that has already started, both at the presidential level and in the House. And so it doesn't appear that there is the support for policing reform. So I imagine that a number of these Democrats are going to be looking to the White House to see if there's more that they can do at the executive level, if there's more that they can do in trying to convince states and local communities to try to move laws and change laws on their own. But they have to show that they're not going to give up on this fight. And so that's part of what yesterday was about, having a meeting to show that they're going to continue to push for this, even though the numbers are stacked against them.
That comprehensive answer totally blew out the follow-up question I was going to ask. That gives us the opportunity to move to the meeting that the president had earlier in the week with Speaker McCarthy. They both appeared to be singing from the same hymn book when it came to what they're going to do or try to do concerning the debt ceiling. But am I reading that right? Did anything constructive come out of that meeting?
Jonathan, the most constructive thing that came out of the meeting was the fact that they had the meeting and the fact that they came out of it without, you know, throwing firebombs at each other, you know, saying that, you know, the other party in the meeting was being disingenuous or was not being reasonable. So they said the right things. They said that they had a good discussion and a good conversation. And they both said that they believe that they would be able to get to an agreement to raise the debt ceiling. Now, you have to read between the lines because Republicans are saying an agreement means negotiation. It means that the Democrats are going to come to the table and talk about spending cuts and talk about how to rein in the spending of the federal government. Democrats, when they say agreement, they mean that they're just going to agree to raise the debt ceiling because they believe that once these bills have already been passed, these budgets have already been passed, raising the debt ceiling is an obligation of Congress just to pay for what has already been passed. And so they are talking from different, different playbooks in a way, even though they're singing from the same hymn book, as you said. And it remains to be seen what Kevin McCarthy will be able to do when he goes back to his caucus and has to deal with the very slim majority that he has, the very limited grip on power that he has with, members of the Republican caucus, having to vote 14 and 15 times just to put him into that speaker's office, and also saying that they would be willing to take him out of that office if he crosses them. Just one Republican member would be needed to start a discharge position to get him out of office. And this is his biggest test with a debt ceiling. And so he faces a more formidable battle in trying to get his caucus together. Democrats are largely united around the idea that the debt ceiling needs to be raised. We don't need to have all of these spending cuts to do it. And so it does remain to be seen what Republicans are going to do and how they're going to come up with an agreement so that they can agree with Democrats and raise the debt ceiling to avoid the first default on the government's debt in the history of the country.
And let's be clear, tying the debt ceiling to future spending cuts does nothing to the debt that's already incurred. It's like going out to a fancy meal and saying, next time I'll just eat less. Meanwhile, that bill is still hanging there. They're singing from the same hymn book on this, but they're singing different hymns. Let's talk about the State of the Union. It's on Tuesday. President Biden, it'll be the first time the president addresses Congress in a State of the Union in a Republican-controlled House with a Speaker McCarthy looming behind him. How might that dynamic impact what we might hear from the president?
I think we'll hear much less about what the president wants to do in Congress because he realizes that Republicans run the House and there's not going to be as much that he can get done legislatively. I think he's going to talk about what he did over the first 2 years when Democrats had unified control of Washington, and they were able to pass pretty aggressive and pretty expansive agenda. And he's going to be spending a lot of time trying to let the American people know about what he did, and let the American people know that he's going to spend much of the next 2 years trying to implement those laws and celebrate those laws so that he can get credit for all the things that they did in the first 2 years. So I do expect this to be a major victory lap. He's going to talk about things like the fact that the job market continues to hum along, the fact that we just added 500,000 new jobs in January, and the economic outlook continues to look pretty strong for the country with inflation slowing. And so he's going to take a victory lap. He's going to talk about things that he wants to get done with the reality of Kevin McCarthy sitting behind him and likely not standing to clap when he says he wants to do things like expanding paid medical leave, expanding childcare, adding new federal government programs that could be quite expensive. I don't expect there to be much Republican support for those things, but the president is going to be essentially kicking off his reelection in major ways by talking about the broad things that he's already done and the big things that he wants to do in the next 2 years and maybe in the second term as well.
And real quickly, because again, you're really good at this anticipating what I'm going to ask next. In his final remarks as Chief of Staff, Ron Klain said, when Biden runs for re-election, that's a clear sign of the obvious. Brother man Biden is going to run for re-election. My question, real fast, has the White House tried to walk back the now former Chief of Staff's words?
Not at all. They have totally been on board with the idea that President Biden is going to announce a re-election bid at some point in the next several weeks. They say that there's no rush to do it. He's not being pressured by any primary opponents. They feel like they're in a strong position, but they're going to do fundraisers. They're going to be rolling out new policy ideas. They're going to be doing all the things that a presidential re-election would be doing if it was official even though it hasn't been officially announced yet. So the fact that Ron Klain has sort of let the cat out of the bag is the biggest secret in the White House. The fact that the president wants to run for re-election, he's already spoken to his family about this. And so we do expect that announcement to come in a matter of weeks. But the White House and the president, the people close to the president, say there's no rush to do this, that President Obama didn't announce his re-election until April of 2011, the year before he was reelected. Obviously, President Trump announced that he was running for re-election as soon as he was inaugurated. So that was a little bit of a different approach. But they say that they have time and that they believe that they have the support that they'll need to be able to run and to be able to win a second term.
So anyone who read my column back in October knows for a fact that Joe Biden is going to run for re-election, but I'll save the patting of my own back for for later. Tolu Olorunipa, White House Bureau Chief for the Washington Post. Thank you, as always, for coming to First Look. Have a good weekend.
You got it. Thanks, Jonathan.
I'm going to keep the conversation going with the Opinions Roundtable in just a moment. Let's go to the opinion side of the Washington Post, where we will find Washington Post columnists Jennifer Rubin and George Will. Jennifer and George, welcome back to First Look.
Nice to be here.
Oh, great, George, your shot's working. There was a concern that it wouldn't be up in time for the shot. So this is great that you are here. So I'm going to throw this out to each of you. George, you go first. What should the president tell the American people Tuesday night?
That the State of the Union is peachy keen because he's president, and he can cite a few things. One is that inflation does appear to have abated somewhat, and the job creation machine of the American economy is in high gear, and that's most of what people care most about. He has two other problems. One is there's a considerable worry in the country about public safety crime, and there is a humanitarian crisis ongoing at the border. I don't know what he'll have to say about that, because what the federal government can do at this point is not clear, at least to me.
Jennifer, what should the president tell the American people?
I think he'll say those things. The American people, as George knows all too well, usually aren't motivated much by foreign policy. But I think it would be a mistake to overlook the work that he has done in forging a united front among Western democracies in defense of Ukraine. That is an extraordinary accomplishment. And although there's been some hiccups of late in exactly what kind of material we'll be providing Ukraine, the flow of support continues. And I think, frankly, the fear that Republicans were going to somehow cut off the supply for Ukraine was a bit overblown. There's strong Republican support as well for this. So I think he'll do those things. And frankly, if he's smart, he'll probably roll out some kind of proposal that might steal the Republicans' thunder. He should come out with a crime proposal. He should come out with a border proposal. And he should come out with something having to do with schools. Parents are legitimately worried after COVID that their kids are stressed and behind, and that the schools are not being responsive to their needs.
All right, so that's actually a nice segue to my follow-up question. Jennifer, you go first. What do the American people want to hear from the president on Tuesday? I think you sort of outlined three of them. Any others come to mind before I go to George on that?
Well, I think the economy is always the number one issue. And although the economy is very strong, if you look at the responses, people think we're in a recession. Now, that may be our natural inclination now to see the cloud around every silver lining. But I don't think the American people are feeling so great about the economy. And I think the more time he spends on that, reassuring them and really explaining what his infrastructure bill is doing and his CHIPS bill is doing, probably the better for him.
George?
Well, first we have to wonder how many are going to watch. The State of the Union has become, in my judgment, brace yourself for my annual diatribe here, has become, in my judgment, the most repulsive single item in our civic liturgy. It's a pep rally for the president's party. Both presidents do this. He says something they approve, they jump up and bray on their hind legs, and then they sit down, and it's absolutely inappropriate, while I'm on the subject, for the uniformed military and for the Supreme Court justices to be attending this pep rally. Now, back to your question, which is the American people who nowadays have 500 channels, and not all of them are going to be tuned to watch the State of the Union. I think what they want to hear is that the president is vigorous and that the president is in charge. The assumption is, I guess, that he's going to run. Let me just say this. If he had already decided not to run, he'd be saying and doing exactly what he's doing now anyway, to prevent him becoming a premature lame duck. When a political party renominates, renominates a president for a second term, the convention chants 4 more years, 4 more years. Try this. People today could be chanting 6 more years, 6 more years. I think that's hard to do with a man who will be 86 at the end of his next term, if there is such.
George, I want to pick up on a word that you used to describe the State of the Union as a quote unquote repulsive pep rally by by the president, which makes me wonder: do you also have a soapbox speech about the response from the minority party? And I'm asking this because Republicans have chosen newly elected Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who was one of Donald Trump's press secretaries when he was in the White House. She's delivering the Republican response to the State of the Union. Your thoughts on the opposing party's response, and what do you think we will hear from Governor Sanders, Huckabee Sanders?
Well, she will say that the glass is half empty, and a continental nation has big problems because it's a big place, and it'll be easy to come up with things that are wrong. She will be viewed by friends and family, and I'm not sure how many other people, as the audience leeches away at the end of this. When I say repulsive, let me, in a spirit of bipartisan nihilism, say that the degradation of the State of the Union really began under Ronald Reagan when he put Lenny Skutnik, who had behaved very well after the Air Florida plane crashed into the 14th Street Bridge. And we began the tradition of stocking the galleries with exemplary people. Mr. Trump, as I recall, gave some kind of medal. We don't do honors very gracefully in our republic, but he gave some sort of medal to Rush Limbaugh in the middle of the State of the Union. How awful can we get? Well, we shall find out.
You know, in
Stop
keeping
that,
with
Jennifer.
Yeah, in keeping with George, I once promised to vote for any candidate who would deliver a State of the Union in writing, because of course the Constitution does not require it be verbal. And these things really are a complete trudge. And all of us in the media get very excited and write all kinds of previews, and 24 hours later, no one remembers anything that was said. The president, Mr. Biden, would get a lot of points if he made it really short. That would get people's attention. Nice 15 brief minutes reviewing the economic numbers, and off we go. But, you know, it's funny that they picked this particular person to respond, because it's such a bone to President Trump, as if they're still quaking in fear that he might do something to disrupt the party even more than he already has. Do they have no one who has accomplished anything on the Republican side? Are they so ashamed of people who have actually performed some kind of public service, or who have governed well? Or do we just not have any of those people? So it's the choice of that particular response brings us, I think, to a new low. But I've been wrong before. I'm sure next year will be even worse.
Real quickly, there are signs that former South Carolina governor, former UN ambassador under Trump, Nikki Haley, will jump into the race for the Republican nomination for president. How might that scramble the race Trump is running, and the race we all presume Governor Ron DeSantis will run, George?
Well, Nikki Haley has an immediate problem, which is she could finish third or even fourth in South Carolina if Tim Scott, the senator from South Carolina, decides to run. Trump and DeSantis have strong support in South Carolina. She's taking, I suppose, a calculated risk that when she's the first person to announce, she will be the lone target of his anger. I think it's a good move on her part because it says, I'm really not worried about his bluster. My hunch is, and it's no more than a hunch, and it may be my wish being father to the thought, but I do think that he's going to rapidly lose altitude. He may have a lock on, say, 28% of the nominating electorate. Therefore, his hope is to be on stage with 10 people. 10 people, his 28% might win. But my hunch is that the rest of the gathering field will watch what happens to Nikki Haley after she's in the race. We'll see that there's nothing to fear, and we will be off and running.
Jennifer, so I mean, you know what I was thinking, analogy I was thinking as George was finishing up his answer, is Nikki Haley the canary in the coal mine? Are people just going to sit back and wait and see how Donald Trump treats her before they decide to jump in the race?
I actually don't think she's that significant. And I don't think Donald Trump is going to spend an awful lot of time on her, quite frankly. He's already figured out that Ron DeSantis is his big competition, and he's already started attacking him. So I don't think she's going to really draw all that much ire from him, aside from some snide remarks that she once did promise not to run against him if he was going to be running. In some respects, though, she represents the very sad trajectory of the Republican Party. It was not too long ago that she was the governor of South Carolina, handled some very difficult issues quite well, actually. Removal of the state flag that bore the bars, stripes and bars, handling of the horrible tragedy at the Charleston AME Church. And then she endorsed, if you remember, Rubio, who was kind of the mainstream, optimistic, pro-immigration future of the Republican Party in 2016. And then it was all downhill from there. She was sucked into the whirlwind that is Donald Trump, and she has now, for all intents and purposes, dropped any opposition that she's really had to him. She hasn't really continued to maintain a line of criticism in the way that people like Asa Hutchinson or people like Larry Hogan have. So I think she's kind of a sad figure in many respects in the Republican Party. I do think Ron DeSantis is biding his time, and he's probably smart to wait a while. Why should he get the full-fledged Trump treatment? Let him stay on the sidelines and continue to build support quietly.
Jennifer, I want to switch gears, but stick with you. We've got less than 5 minutes. You had to talk about police reform. You had a column yesterday proclaiming that President Biden needs to lead the effort on police reform. What do you want him to do?
Well, I think he needs to do two things. One is to kind of get us out of this silly loop of fund the police, defund the police. The question is what we should be funding. And the federal government does spend a lot of money on police, probably to Georgia's chagrin. The states are no longer necessarily completely in charge of public policing. Federal government plays a huge role. So the question is, what do you want the federal government to be doing? What should we be spending our money on? And frankly, there's some impressive results in the laboratories of democracy from places like Miami of techniques and training that actually does reduce police shootings, that does reduce police deaths, and either themselves or the people that they are pursuing. And the president should roll out a program that funds these types of programs, that encourages these types of programs. He should make clear that we do have a national problem. It's not simply a few bad apples in one city or another, and that we're a big enough, smart enough, brave enough country to take this problem on and to start doing the things we need to do. And one idea that frankly has been used in some cities is to end the practice of armed police making traffic stops for innocuous violations like having an expired tag on your card. those tend to set the ground, frankly, for these horrible events. There's a terrible statistic that 58% of these police killings start with something that is a nonviolent incident, a traffic stop, or interceding with someone who has obvious mental health problems. So there are things the president can do. I think he should, as he will almost certainly do, express concern for the rate of crime and for people's right to have a sense of security in their own communities. But at the same time, he should say we should be moving forward on things that we know will work, and invite Congress to join with him. I think anything else would be seen as kind of ignoring a problem that is endemic and very visible and is beginning to erode support for the police. I point to the ABC Washington Post poll that's out today that support in the police is declining. And police, and frankly, police unions, who have been an impediment to many of these reforms, should be concerned about that too. They should be getting on board in some reform efforts to try to restore public confidence.
George, we have less than 2 minutes, but I would love to get your reaction to what Jennifer said, but also I want to put this on the table. The stumbling block to getting the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act out of the Senate was over the issue of the elimination of qualified immunity. Why should officers have that shield from accountability?
No public figure should have that qualified immunity shield. The Cato Institute and some others are campaigning tirelessly to remove this judge-created doctrine that makes it very difficult to hold public figures, not just uniformed police officers, accountable. But go back to what Jennifer said about the public unions. It is almost impossible to fire for incompetence a public school teacher. It's not an option, it's a career to try and do that. There are 300,000 teachers in California, maybe 2 a year usually are removed. Now, if you think all but 2 of those 300,000 are competent teachers, you are mistaken. In Minneapolis, in the decade before the murder of George Floyd, the police department received 2,600 complaints. There were 12 disciplinary actions taken, the most severe of which was a 40-hour suspension. That is the result of the contracts negotiated by the police unions, and they are the heart of the problem.
Wow. George Will, Jennifer Rubin, we are completely out of time. As always, thank you both for coming to First Look. Have a great weekend.
You too.
You too.
Head to WashingtonPostLive.com to find more information about next week's interviews and to register. I'm Jonathan Capehart. Thank you for watching Washington Post Live's First Look.